a lot of companies are almost sleepwalking into their event planning. The way that we start off is thinking about the strategy. What's the purpose of doing this event? Why are we doing this? Then we think about what's the content, what are we trying to say? And then we think about the experience and the logistics. An event goes from being a great event to a transformative event when you really connect with the audience and send them away thinking about what they've just been to. What does this mean for them? How can they bring that back to their company? It's about the quality of your message. It's about storytelling and content. And yes, you can get a big name celebrity which sells 1,000 tickets. But if those 1,000 people aren't potential customers, then really all you're doing is inflating your ego a little bit. So I think utilitarianism is potentially the death of an event. You can't please everyone and you can't do everything for everyone all the time. And when you see someone trying to do that at an event, it's the equivalent of doing a dinner party and giving everyone the meal they want. When it comes to events, plan for everything, have contingencies, but know that there's going to be things you can't do anything about. Don't start planning until you actually have a plan.
So maybe we could just start about your transition from working in a kitchen to now leading several brands or helping several brands today. What's a lesson that you took away from your kitchen days?
I would love to say I had a big master plan, which I'm now enacting and playing out. However, the reason I got into the kitchen really was that after university studying philosophy, I really didn't have a natural path and I wasn't entirely sure what to do. I just knew that I loved hospitality. I loved catering for people, and it was kind of a natural step for me to do that while I was thinking what to do next. I did 5 or 6 years of cooking, and I really learned. I was properly trained as a French chef, and I learned the processes of building a menu and working in a kitchen and working all the different areas and working with people from all different backgrounds and all different levels. And so when I transitioned into events work, which really came through cooking in a kitchen, working for a catering company, doing my own events, finding that I couldn't do the cooking and run the bar and book the tent and do everything else, and starting to think, well, actually, I've got to hire a chef now. I suddenly was an event person. But the transition to do this as a business was really just an opportunity. I had an opportunity to do some freelance work for a small agency called Global Guest List. I took it on. I really enjoyed it. They offered me a job when someone left, and I joined, and that's the company I'm still with 20 years later. So there was no real plan. However, the lessons and the time in the kitchen really stood me in good stead. And I have to say, anyone who comes to me with a CV that includes working in a kitchen or working behind a bar or serving, I'll always take a second look at.
That resonates with me because I started in serving as well, and I think it was very formative for my character, resilience, and just learning to take on some different perspectives, have that learning mindset, and it also kind of, I don't think I've ever been as busy as when you're serving. You're doing so many things at such a high pace. It's almost like being in a pit stop or something at a Formula One event.
Yeah, it's made for adrenaline junkies. It's nonstop, working and moving and thinking and everything else, which I think is such a great training.
It's full on. Now you started as a concierge. Pardon me. EMC3 started as a concierge service. How did you evolve from a high touch personal service into high impact corporate experiences?
So back in the early 2000s, concierge was quite a big thing. There were companies like Quintessentially and 10UK who were looking after big corporate accounts, working for American Express, etc. And we saw an opportunity there because we had great connections throughout London, particularly. Um, and so we were getting executives into nightclubs and tickets for shows and bookings in restaurants that they couldn't get into because they didn't know the maitre d'. And really along the way, we were just learning how to look after people's needs. And it was all about hospitality. And it was all about thinking about what the person wants, trying to find a solution for them that would, delight them and make them happy and serve whatever their needs were. So as they started to ask us to also do their summer parties and Christmas parties and bar mitzvahs and weddings and all that sort of thing, we realized that those skills were very transferable. Understanding the audience needs is still what we do today. And it's just doing it on a different scale. We do events now for tens of thousands of people. A major part of the planning and strategy process is who are the audience? Why are they here? What do they need? And it's exactly the same when it's two people. Where do they want to go for dinner? What do they need? What's the location that they require? What's their price point? So they're very, very transferable. The transition was, again, looks like a great master plan, but actually was just a natural transition from small events into slightly larger ones, logistics focused into content focused through need. A client coming to us and saying, "Can you book a speaker for us? Can you, do a topic?" And then from there, the content into strategy was a very easy move. The funny thing is, we actually work in the reverse now. So the way that we start off is thinking about the strategy. What's the purpose of doing this event? Why are we doing this? Then we think about what's the content, what are we trying to say, and then we think about the experience and the logistics. So we've kind of like flipped it on its head a little bit.
I think it definitely makes sense to do it that way. And what would you say, having gone through that transition from logistics into content into the strategy, what are the same? So you said audience focus as it maybe a theme. What are maybe other themes or skills or qualities that you think are appropriate across all of those three different domains?
I think there's always a need for attention to detail. Whenever you're delivering any kind of event or gathering or occasion, if you understand the big picture, you understand the purpose, the strategy, and then you look at the details that build that together, then you've got an opportunity to elevate it and to build it in a way that resonates with people. One of the challenges that we often find, and a lot of the work we do is corporate work now, we don't really do the weddings or the private events so much, is that finding that initial alignment between all of the people involved in the project gives you that opportunity to really look at why it's going to work or why it might fail, and to build out a strategy which is really deliverable. If you come into it not knowing who your audience are, or not understanding what the CFO wants out of it, or not understanding the tension between sales and marketing, then it's very hard to deliver for your end client.
And you mentioned essentially, I would see it as B2C versus B2B. So the weddings and bar mitzvahs versus the corporate events. Again, there's going to be some crossover there. But what are the main differences when it comes to running an event that is B2C versus B2B?
So in my world, the B2C events, we do B2C events, which are more, an activation at a festival or something where, a brand is going out there and trying to put on an event that which is going to connect with a broader audience that isn't necessarily invited. Um, Talking about the weddings, I mean, the biggest challenge that I found with weddings, apart from the fact that it's the biggest day of multiple people's lives, is you've got many bosses. You've got the bride, you've got the groom, you've got the mother of the bride, the father of the, all of these people have got a say in it. And it's not really our job to mediate their family relationships in the same way that we would maybe mediate a boardroom and make sure that that boardroom is aligned. So for me personally, it was not my favorite field. you know, Having long arguments over which linen to use really didn't do it for me. The purpose of the event or the occasion was to celebrate the couple, and often the details and the minutiae that people would get fixated on were more of a coping mechanism for the stress of it. Whereas in corporate events, maybe that stress is a slightly different one. It's about pressure from KPIs or from your boss or from the market, and that's something you can really address in a much clearer way.
Mhm. And less personal if you do need to mediate or if you do need to get alignment. You're probably less likely to step on a mine, I would think.
I think so, and I think maybe I lacked some of the empathy required to spend hours working on a linen plan.
I'd like to touch on the name. Is that an homage to breaking limits, like Einstein's special relativity, cubed instead of squared?
Originally, the name came out of our services, and we were rebranding. So we were Global Guest List, which was a really great name for a concierge service. Great, get me on the guest list anywhere in the world. Didn't work so well for events. So when we rebranded back in 2006, um, we came up with a name which really focused on what we did. So it was very basic. It was events, marketing, concierge, conferences, and creativity. So three C's, and that's where it came from. I remember going on phone calls with clients and explaining it, and you could see them, their eyes kind of glaze over after the second C. And we realized after a while that it really didn't matter. Where the name came from wasn't such a big thing. Many years later, we actually reversed into a better meaning for it. So now it's every moment counts. And that really talks to the detail and the purpose behind what we do. And the every moment counts piece was something which really resonated with people. It was very easy to explain that. And I don't think that we're too proud as to say that we didn't, very cleverly again have a big plan at the beginning to build a brand around every moment counts. The three people ask us about now, and one of the explanations that we'll now use is, we're a B Corp, and one of the major things about being a B Corp is that it's not just about profit; it's about people, planet, and profit. So for me, I think that's a great understanding about the three drivers for what we do, and it fits very nicely into the every moment counts piece as well. Einstein had nothing on us; much more complicated.
Yeah, there's a lot of meaning packed into just a few symbols. You've worked with LinkedIn, NYU, and Google, many big brands. What separates a forgettable event from a transformative one or transformational one?
I would say it always comes down to purpose. Delivering for a client an event where everyone gets fed well, they turn up, things work is basics. It's the things that every event agency should be able to do. And there are agencies out there that are very much logistical. They are working on 1,000 events a year, and they're literally just churning them out. And that's a great business. It's not our business. We're very much more focused on a long-term strategy. And for me, an event goes from being a great event to a transformative event when you really connect with the audience and send them away thinking about what they've just been to. What does this mean for them? How can they bring that back to their company? How can they be educated by it and educate others from it? So if we're doing an internal event, for example, we might have 1,000 people from a sales team who are coming together one time a year and are then going to be sent off to have 4 great quarters and kill it for their company. If you have a great event, then they're going to come away from that with a really clear roadmap, understanding what's expected of them, the tools to deliver it, and they're going to just hit the ground running. Alternatively, they come along, they have a great time, they see all their friends, and they have a good drink, and they go back to work and do the same thing they did yesterday. You've not really delivered for them.
You've been refining EMC3's creative process to align with executive teams. What common friction do you help resolve at that level?
I think that the business has evolved over many years, the business of events. And what I've seen from executive teams since 2008, 2008, we had the big, the crash of the financial industry. And we went from a situation where a great event was one where you lavished champagne and caviar on your attendees so that they thought you were generous. We then went into a phase where it was about celebrity. And this is how I saw it, at least. Executive teams would want Michelle Obama to speak at their event, or the joke was everyone always asked for Oprah, and Oprah never was going to do any events, but that's what they wanted because that was how they were going to sell tickets. And it really became about volume. And I think in the social media world, it's about clicks and it's about millions of people seeing your brand, and it was very much about the amount of people that were there. Where I see it now, and what I think executive teams are realizing is it's about the quality of your message. It's about storytelling and content. And yes, you can get a big name celebrity which sells 1,000 tickets, but if those 1,000 people aren't potential customers or aren't advocates for your brand, then really all you're doing is inflating your ego a little bit and maybe looking like you've had a great event. But at the end of the day, the KPIs that you set at the beginning won't be fulfilled because those attendees aren't necessarily the right fit for you. And I do believe that executive teams are realizing this more and more. I think that the alignment between marketing and sales is going to get closer when you're actually providing the marketing team with the KPIs that the sales team needs for a successful event.
It's interesting. You mentioned earlier about the friction between sales and marketing, and I had a little grin because my background is in sales training. And always, when I'm working with a company for a longer period of time, the reason why they don't hit their quotas is because of marketing, right? And marketing say we didn't hit the revenue because of sales, and it's always that way. So I think anything that can help either side or both sides to see things from the other side and work better together is better for everybody involved, better for the company, better for both. I want to go back to, so you mentioned about what makes a transformational event, and I wondered during COVID, where these types of events weren't happening, how do you keep that same level of transformation? And I'm guessing it's going to be something around the content, but a memorable event, something that's going to make an impact, especially if it's maybe a day event and it's done online. How do you keep that same level of transformation?
I mean, COVID obviously for the event space was, apocalyptic. We went from having an incredible year and a lot of business ahead of us, and we were actually growing in a lovely way that we were working very closely with companies who'd done events for 3 or 4 years with us. Um, that all disappeared overnight, and we went to virtual. I think the lesson for us was you can't replicate the live event in a virtual space. You're not doing the same thing. And I think if you try and do that, then it's very hard to be able to deliver for the audience because, you imagine you do an event for a big brand, they have a day's worth of content. You've got hour-long sessions. You've got incredible keynotes. You've got breaks where people go for lunch. None of that is possible, I think, to deliver in a virtual space because at the end of the day, you're not going to sit for 10 hours watching a screen, go and have your own lunch, come back and watch again. It just isn't a great experience. So we had to change the way we did it. I think some of the more successful ways of of um, of restructuring the event was to have shorter sessions, to have more panels, so you've got more people talking to each other. I mean, I consume information a lot better when it's a conversation rather than a monologue. And I think that online, even more so, if you're watching a person talking on screen, for them to hold your attention for a 40-minute keynote, I would say is next to impossible. I think that they've got to be one of the best speakers in the world for you to just listen to one person speak for that time. Whereas if they're having a back and forth and they're maybe disagreeing a little bit or they're being asked a question which they hadn't answered before, it's a little bit more engaging. It's a little bit easier to actually connect with that person. So we shortened the sessions. We had more conversation. Um, we did our best to include meaningful Q&A. And I think at the beginning of COVID, it was really hard because there really wasn't any great solution. The platforms that we were working with were good, but not great. The interaction was very awkward. Having a Q&A in a text box at the side of the screen meant that you're talking to someone who's looking to the right all the time to see what the question is that's being asked. So, we found solutions along the way and it got better, but we just had to accept we weren't going to be able to deliver the same sort of content in the same events. And it was funny, we had a year of everyone going, this is what we do now. We're now an online virtual event company. And this is how it's going to be forever. Then you remember at some points in COVID, everyone thought this is it now. This is how we live our lives. It naturally went back to connection in person. And we still probably, I would say, deliver 80% of our events as a hybrid event. So an element of the event is delivered virtually, whether it's live or after the event. But the main value, I would say, for most of our clients is the in-person, opportunity. Is it's like the water cooler moments in an office. Those moments where you bump into someone or you listen in on a conversation, you learn something from it, or you happen upon a breakout that you would never have chosen to be in if you were looking down a list on an online, agenda. But you walked past the room and there was a good buzz in there, so you went in and you heard something you'd never have otherwise heard. Yeah, it's just a very different animal. And from the point of view of my team, I felt so sorry for them to some extent. They got into this business because they're personable, they like being around people, they like delivering events, and they ended up building websites. Basically, what they were doing was building and managing a website to deliver content for an audience, which is not the same muscles and it doesn't bring the same joy to that character. We just had to accept it wasn't going to be the same level of transformation for us. Maybe other companies felt differently, but for us, it was a stopgap really on the way back to what we do now.
So do you not do any online events now? Do
We
you
do.
focus mainly? You do? Okay.
No, we do them, and there are clients who need them. But I would say the value of those are going to be the opportunities where you don't want to travel people. So, for example, if you're doing a monthly town hall for your all hands company, you're not going to fly everyone in every month if you're a remote company or if you've got multiple offices. So, absolutely, for those, a virtual event is fantastic. But the content for that event will be an hour to 2 hours max, and it will be curated in a way that is digestible for the attendee, and is also they can watch it back anytime they want. We it's very hard to say you have to be here in this moment to watch these things and expect 100% attendance. But I honestly, I don't remember the last time that we had a client who came to us and said, we want to do an event for our clients and make it 100% virtual. I think that for me, there is a space for that. It's just not really our ICP.
Your profile calls you a betting man. What's the biggest risk you've taken in business, and how has it played out?
I don't know if it's the biggest risk in business, but the biggest risk in my business life has been moving to America. Um, Only because of the personal investment of time and energy and commitment from my family. However, the upside on it was so big that it felt like the odds were in my favor. Um, how it is playing out is very well. It's not done yet. We've only been here for 9 months, but the majority of our market is in the US. For years, I was trying to persuade my team to come over here. I was like, to my head of sales, VP of growth, you should definitely move to America. You'd love it. It would be great, because we needed to build our leadership team over here. And there was just a moment of realization where I kind of went, oh, gosh, it's me. I'm the one who should come over here. And, I'm really pleased I did. I can't say that I haven't loved every moment of it. But, moving the whole family over to another time zone and being in a different place to my business partner and the rest of the leadership team has been a challenge. And I would say we're starting to see the real benefits of it. Again, like talking about those water cooler moments, when you do business trips to America, as I was doing for a week every month, you can start relationships, but then you have to carry them on Zoom. And it's very hard to close deals and to move the needle. Whereas here, I'll meet someone on a Thursday and I'm not flying home on the Friday or the Saturday. So the following week I can follow up and we can keep it moving. And we're starting to see the benefits of that. And for our team over here as well, we have, I think 15, 16 people in the US. Having leadership here has started to make a bit of a difference in, that understanding of our commitment to the US market.
Tell us about a time when something went totally sideways, and how did you lead through it?
I mean, there's been so many. I think that events are a living, breathing thing. And I think I can probably count on one hand the number of events where we haven't had things go wrong, because they are going to. I mean, you're involving humans and you're involving, a wide mix of people coming together for a very short period of time and trying to deliver on it. I think the most dramatic, um, I would say, would be we did an event called Inbound for many years, and Inbound is one of the biggest marketing events in the world. It's about 20,000 people based in Boston, and our role in that event was to we ran the networking lounge, we did the general session, and we did the talent. And in 2016, we were doing the event, and I don't know if you remember, there was an election that happened, and it was happening during the event. So November the 8th, 2016, um, there was an election, and Mr. Trump won. We had Sarah Silverman speaking 2 days later, and she unfortunately had to pull out. I believe she had a bad back, but it may have been that there was some other things going on. So we had 24 hours to find a headline act. And we worked very closely with our partners, and we managed to book Trevor Noah on less than 24 hours notice. And he played to 12,000 people on the Thursday night, so 2 days after the election, and absolutely killed it. But there was a point in time where our headline act had disappeared. We had a room full of people who were very antagonistic to some extent, that you had obviously people on both sides of the political spectrum, and we were catering to all of them. This was not a political conference. However, a lot of the speakers there had a view. We happened to have Alec Baldwin on the day after, and he at the time was playing Trump on Saturday Night Live. So, there was a lot of this going on. And if we hadn't managed to work with our client and work with our partners to find a solution, I think we would have had a very unhappy audience.
Yeah, that sounds pretty harrowing there, Daniel. I guess you could have discovered a new talent if you had to go up and entertain 12 or 20,000 people.
That's my biggest fear. Standing on that stage would be, honestly, that would be the thing that made me the most uncomfortable. I think, like most event people, I like being behind the scenes, wearing black, headset on, anonymous.
I wanted to ask you, actually go back to what you said, something you mentioned right at the start, which was you did a degree in philosophy. So where do you see? So David and I often have very long and I would say quite deep philosophical conversations sometimes, and then we'll go straight into a business conversation and then back out into a philosophical one. I wonder where you see the crossover of philosophy and business, if there has been in your experience in your life.
Absolutely. I mean, philosophy is the study of life. It's understanding how people interact. And, I don't think I probably realized how much I was learning at the time, because I didn't have much to apply it to. And I think this is one of the challenges with philosophy for me. I believe it should be taught from, year one at school. It is giving people the tools in a secular way to really understand why they're here, what their purpose is, what they're doing. And I think it's incredibly beneficial and useful. That said, until you've lived a bit of life, it's very hard to actually understand the truth of it or the value of it or what is true for you. And the more time I've spent in business and the more time I've spent around people of different cultures with different backgrounds and beliefs, the greater my appreciation of what I've learned has been. You know, I'm a big fan of Stoic philosophy. The teachings of the Stoics, I think, are absolutely vital if you're going to run events. You know, there is no point trying to control things that are outside of your control. So, you know, when it comes to events, plan for everything, you know, have contingencies, but know that there's going to be things you can't do anything about. And same from a business point of view, you know, the best laid plans can fall apart when a pandemic happens or when tariffs hit or when the market goes wrong or a client leaves. You know, all of these things are outside of our control and there's no point worrying about them. However, if you've got good plans in place, good systems, a good culture, a strong purpose, then you can get through it and you can move forward with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree. And I think there's, when you're dealing with people, philosophy is going to be a very important thing to be in the back of your mind. That the different ways, the different perspectives that people might have, and Stoicism as a set of ideas or as an idea might be something that really helps in one area, but somebody might be coming at something from a different perspective. Or probably with events, I would think utilitarianism comes in, right? Like greatest good for the greatest number. So I think it probably adds a dynamic in a way that if somebody had never thought about philosophy before, never heard about any of these ideas, might not have an insight into the way other people might think or into ways that they might approach their business in whatever way.
Yeah, I mean, just to say, I think utilitarianism is potentially the death of an event.
Right, okay.
Just because I think you can't please everyone and you can't do everything for everyone all the time. And when you see someone trying to do that at an event, it's the equivalent of doing a dinner party and giving everyone the meal they want. You're making a rod for your back. You know, it's going to make life very hard and it's not expressing your personality. So from that point of view, I think that's maybe not the best one for events. I do believe that companies should be value led. I think if you're going to be a strong and a resilient business, you need to have very clear values that are communicated with your team and also with your customers. And I think events are one of the great places to showcase that. You know, if you're a company that really strongly believes in sustainability, that needs to be front and center at your event. And it's a great way for that to be expressed in a public manner. By the same point, if your company is all about profit and business, then that should come through in the way that you communicate and tell stories to your customers and your colleagues. So I think philosophy, I think, has a massive role to play within business space because it is the foundation on which values are built, and values are the foundation on which culture is built, and culture is what builds companies.
I want to dig into a little bit more on what you said there in terms of the balance between essentially authenticity, right? This is us, this is what we stand for, this is what we believe in. But then the other side of being audience centric and what do the audience care about? What do they stand for? And of course, where that crossover is. Where would you say, so if you think utilitarianism might be all audience, try and please as many people in the audience as possible, which might then take us away from authenticity. But going, I want to talk about what I want to talk about because it's important to me and I'm not going to care about the audience. Also, probably not a great way of playing that spectrum. Where's the balance?
If you're putting on an event and you're building the event, so for example, you know, you're a brand and you say we're going to do an event for all of our customers. The story you're telling is the story your customers need to hear for your business. If they don't like your story, they may not be your customers anymore. And that's a business decision about whether or not you're going in the right direction. And I'm sure that there's been situations where companies have pivoted and lost some of their customer base, but they've gone in the direction that works for them. And I'd say that, you know, in that instance, you need to be true to you and you need to project the image that you want the world to see. If you're speaking on a stage at someone else's event and you go off on some tangent that's got nothing to do with the purpose of that event, then I'd say that you're not doing a service to the organizer or to the audience. And I do see that happening sometimes. And I'd say that the responsibility of that sits primarily with the organizers to brief the speakers and to say, this is what the event's about. We've booked you for these reasons. These are the topics that we'd love you to cover. And if the person says, you know what, I've got a stump speech, I'm going to do my stump speech, they can then decide, do they want that or not? But, I've been at events before where people have gone rogue and ended up, really going against the values of the company. And in fact, one example of which was, I'd say one of the best examples of a company taking ownership of the situation. We did an event for a company called Drift in, I'd guess it's around 2017, 2018 in Boston. And one of the speakers went up on stage and was incredibly inappropriate and offended a lot of people. And it was a major issue. We could see on social media that the attendees were really not happy. And the CEO of Drift, a good friend of mine, David Cancel, went on stage and apologized and said, we do not own this. We brought him on stage. Sorry, he said, we own this. We brought this man on stage. We do not agree with his views or what he said. And we want to apologize to anyone who's offended. And the audience really accepted that because he was taking ownership of the situation. And I'm sure they wouldn't have put that guy if they knew he was going to say the things he said. But, sometimes that is going to happen. And the most important thing is to be honest and to understand your audience and understand their needs and then, deal with it in that moment.
You've spent time inside the YPO community. What are the biggest mindset shifts you've seen from that level of network?
I'd say, I've been involved in YPO for many, many years. So when we first started the business out, we were organizing YPO events and we were dealing with incoming YPO groups to London and looking after them. And for those that don't know, YPO is the Young Presidents Organization, and they're executives of businesses of a certain size and scale. So they have a lot of shared challenges. I joined the YPO as a member in 2020, just before the pandemic. And the time I spent with the YPO in that first year, which was entirely virtual, so we were doing meetings online, really got me through the pandemic to some extent, because I could see that no matter what business people were in and no matter what stage of their business, whether they were, founders or they were acquiring businesses and selling them or they'd just been bought, etc., everyone was kind of dealing with the same personal challenges. And I think one of the reasons that the YPO works, and as I understand it, the reason why the YPO was born in the first place was it's quite lonely at the top. And you can't generally talk to anyone other than a business partner or maybe your board about the challenges you're going through. And there's still a risk in that there's a potential of judgment or there's a potential of those relationships being tainted by that conversation. The YPO is there so that you've got a network of people around you who can share some of those challenges and can give their experience to you. They're not there to give you advice necessarily so much as to give you context and to give you the opportunity to air out some of the things that weigh on you and to give you the chance to process them.
Have you worked with an executive coach or as leadership coach yourself to enhance your own kind of leadership or business abilities?
I haven't one-on-one. We're very lucky in the work we do that a lot of the speakers and a lot of the talent that work on our events are those people. So we've done a lot of work with Simon Sinek and with Brené Brown and Adam Grant and that kind of cohort of incredible coaches and leaders. And I've learned a lot from them. Honestly, I would love to, take on a bit more of that knowledge on a one-to-one, but it's just finding the time and making the time for myself.
Well, you've got a decent exposure to the world's top of that, which I think probably accounts for a lot more than a lot of people get, even if they do one-to-one coaching.
We're very lucky, and one other thing is that we're a relatively small agency. We're 60 or so people. We have a learning and development manager within the team who is full time helping the team with their personal development, and it really is at the heart of what we do. We want people to join us and have the opportunity to grow as individuals and as contributors to our business, and we invest in that. And it's something which I also make use of, and I spend time with Emily talking through some of the things that I'm thinking and some of the challenges or some of the opportunities that I want clarity on. And I think that there's something to that. I don't know if you remember the TV program Billions, but there's the Wendy character in Billions who's kind of geeing up all of the team and making them the best versions of themselves. And I think that kind of concept of supporting your team to deliver for you is a very necessary and a very worthwhile investment in a business.
Agreed. What is one of the best events you've been to and what made it special or memorable?
So this is very front of mind because I was just there this month, but there's an event called Possible, which is in Miami every May, and it's in the kind of advertising and marketing space. And what I found incredible about it was the audience was so engaged. Every single person that I met there was there for a positive reason of networking, of building their business up, of being open to opportunities, to meeting people. And I must have had 20, 30 conversations over the course of 2 or 3 days that were potentially transformative. It was like, wow, I've got to make sure I stay in touch with this person. And I think there's so much kudos has to go to the organizers that they've built an environment within which those people thrive. And there were lots of things that I would change about details of the event. And that's, obviously a personal thing. It's like going to a restaurant and nitpicking about all the details. It was just a great environment for connection. And I think so many events forget about that. They think so much about the content, or they think about the catering, or all of these other areas. But connection is really, is something that has to be driven through purpose and through planning. If you don't give people the opportunity to connect, then they won't.
On that point, if you could wave a magic wand, what would you change about the events industry by the end of the decade?
This is a really easy one, actually. So we are a B Corp. We have a sustainability consultancy within our company. Events are one of the most wasteful businesses in the world, and the amount of waste at events is really painful. We not just food that's thrown away, but stages that are built and then scrapped, and every element of that stage, apart from maybe the LED, is just in a dumpster. There are better ways of doing this, and we're trying really hard to educate and to support our industry so that we can get better. And we work with our clients, and we work with venues, we work with vendors to help consult and to build out a program so that they can become more sustainable, and find ways to improve. It's impossible to be zero. It's impossible to have it so that it's fully recyclable. It's just not realistic. However, what you can do is benchmark and improve year on year, and find ways to just make those small incremental improvements, so that you don't see. We did an event, and we tracked how much food was wasted at the event, and it was eye-watering. And it was about a bad decision at the early stages of how they were going to cater the event. A massive buffet does not make sense when you don't know how many people are going to arrive. And if food has gone out on a buffet, it can't then be sent to a shelter or offered up as to other people. However, if the food hasn't left the kitchen, it can be. And if you have a plan in place at the beginning so that food isn't, potentially dangerous to someone else who gets it, then you can make sure it's not wasted. And all of these little things, I think, are just an education that's just started. And certainly, I would say in Europe, there's a better appetite for sustainable practices. I think in America, it's hit and miss. Some places are more with it than others. But I think the education that sustainable events aren't necessarily more expensive, and the upside is massive, is, I think, a change that needs to come.
Seems like you're leading the way. That's a powerful message. Is there anything that we didn't touch on in events that you feel we'd be remiss for not mentioning?
I can't think off the top of my head of anything in particular. I think that, for me, I'm very passionate about events. I just think bringing people together is one of the joys in my life. And, the opportunity to connect people with each other and to get people with ideas is really the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning. And I think that, a lot of companies are almost sleepwalking into their event planning. That early stage engagement with the executive team, with your marketing team, with your sales team, with all the people who might be involved in the event, will give you the chance to actually put a meaningful event together. And we can't say this enough to people, is don't start planning until you actually have a plan. If you know what you're trying to achieve, then you can go out and use your dollars wisely. Whereas if you just say, right, we're going to do 1,000 people in Florida, and there's going to be at this date, and there's these speakers, without actually understanding the purpose and bringing it all together, then you're wasting your money and wasting your time.
That seems to be a pattern with the hype cycle and new technology. It's like you want more, faster, but the age-old like principles are still there. Like, what problem are you solving? Who are you trying to serve? What's the purpose, etc. Because otherwise, you're just going nowhere fast. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you. You've had an amazing career. I love the arc from cook to events and experience planner, and the responsibility and sustainability approach to it as well. Where can people follow what you do? Where would you like to point them?
Well, please follow EMC3. So our Instagram, I think, is at EMC3 London. We have our website, emc3.com. And in New York, actually, if anyone's here, we organize these lunches every other Friday called Pulse, where anyone in the events industry can come along, network, bring their problems, bring their challenges, meet with other professionals, and reach out to me on my LinkedIn.
Nice. Well, thank you for talking to us today, Daniel. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you so much, guys.